let's get to a couple fan questions and then get out of here, Scott, if that's okay.
Okay.
There's one that was both a topic on Cincy Jungle and it was readdressed in the YouTube chat. There's been a lot of comments, so I'm trying to scroll back to see who it was, but it has to do with the possibility of a trade with the Jets, AJ McCarron, maybe throwing in Sheldon Richardson. Obviously, there's been a lot of friction with Sheldon Richardson and the Jets. I think he's had a couple of off-field issues as well, but very talented defensive lineman. The Bengals don't have Domata Peko under contract anymore, even though Sheldon Richardson isn't necessarily a defensive tackle. He's a 3-4 defensive end. So couple of questions here, especially now that the team has lost talented players in free agency, and based on their lack of visits and whatever their plan is going forward, getting picks for a guy that may have value that doesn't really have value to the current team he's on, aside from being a backup. Would you explore this trade? And would Sheldon Richardson, if he might be involved in that trade, would he be someone that you would like, even though you have Andrew Billings coming back? And like I said, I'm trying to look up here to see. Richardson was fined and was suspended for the first 4 games of the 2015 regular season for failing the substance abuse policy. So there's a couple little things in his background, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think on the surface, I like it because, and when I first saw the idea posted by the New York media, I thought, oh, that'd be really cool because I want to get something from McCarron. You look at the money that Osweiler got last year, the money that Glennon's going to get. Yeah, a backup quarterback who teams perceive as being decent is going to get some money. Garoppolo, if he ever gets traded, he's probably going to get paid. And part of the reason is because everyone wants a starter and not everyone has a starter. So you're going to trade for one, which basically means McCarron's gone after this year. The Bengals can say what they want. Yeah, we'd like to have him long-term and keep him. Well, he's not going to stay just to be a backup. And you're not going to pay a guy, $16 million or whatever to be a backup. And at that point, someone's going to be desperate enough to give money. So he's gone at the end of the year. So you want to get something for him. And I don't know what the trade market is for him. If we can get draft picks, players, depends on who all is calling us. It probably depends on what shakes out with guys like Tony Romo and Jay Cutler and Glennon. So and see who's left. But if the Jets happen to be the one team left and they're offering Richardson for him, or you sit him and you watch him go, on the surface, I like the idea because here's a guy, he was a high first-round pick, defensive player of the year, rookie year, Pro Bowler the next year. But then, all heck just seemed to break loose. They have a couple other guys on the defensive line who seem to be better, and he's just kind of fallen more into the he's still starting, but not getting the same kind of reps or snaps, and he fell down to only 1.5 sacks last year. You mentioned he was suspended last year, 4 games. He was suspended the year before. He has locker room issues, got into some sort of fight with Brandon Marshall for some reason over Twitter. People don't seem to like him on the team. He was benched for a game because of chronic tardiness. So he doesn't really seem like the kind of guy you would want in the locker room. So I think considering all that, I probably would not make the trade only because I don't mind he's a 1-year deal because McCarron's going after the year. But he seems to be more baggage than he's worth, and I think I'd pursue picks. But if we can get something from McCarron, I would jump on it. And some people would say, well, it's kind of silly because if Dalton goes down, you want to have that backup. But honestly, I think if Dalton goes down, you're not going to the playoffs. You're not winning the playoffs. So at that point, does it really matter? Does it matter if you're losing a game 17-16 versus 30-3? If you have to rely on your backup quarterback, you're probably not going to win. And if you're not going to win, I'd say it really doesn't matter. So why not get the players, the picks, or whatever you can for him?
I would agree with you to an extent. And, I think Sheldon Richardson, talented guy, but there's 2 concerns for me. If the trade option was Sheldon Richardson for AJ McCarron or whatever that would look like, Sheldon Richardson has played in a 3-4 defense. And if there's one thing the Bengals have made a really bad habit of, and I guess this could go back to what they should give up for Lent, is grabbing scheme play guys that don't fit their scheme. Talented guys, but they don't fit their scheme. And they've done that in years past. And I don't know that Sheldon Richardson, a 3-4 defensive end, would be a super effective player in the Bengals. You can call it a nickel front, which is mostly what it is, but it's usually a 4-man front. So that's one thing. And then you got to look at now the state of the offensive line after such a poor year protecting the passer last year. They're in way worse shape this year. And how long is Andy Dalton going to stay upright? I mean, I don't say that as any kind of I wish injury on him or anything, but I think I'm a little legitimately scared for his well-being based on losing their 2 best linemen and not really having a plan in place on it. So in that respect, you mentioned the backup quarterback may not be able to get them to the playoffs or something like that. Yes, but we did see A.J. McCarron have some moments in the 5 games he played in, including the playoffs. A couple of years ago. So I don't know. I don't know. But I do agree with you. They need to get something for him if they're open for him. And maybe now with losses of great players and things like that, maybe now they're a little more open to trade talks, or will be more open to trade talks than they will have been previously to losing some of these good guys. One other – Go ahead.
Real quick, you mentioned scheme. Just something I want to throw out, just totally out of nowhere. But as far as Richardson being a 3-4 defensive end, they actually seem to have the personnel that they could switch to that. If you figure Billings could be your big plugging nose tackle, Dunlap kind of has the size of a defensive end with his height and size. Marcus Hunt is more of a 3-4 defensive end also. Richardson. So you've got Dunlap, Richardson, and I know Hunt's a backup, but still you have them. The one thing you're missing is the edge rusher. So let's say, they go after Yokiero Taco Charlton or someone in the first or second round, you've got your edge rusher. You seem to have the guys up front. I know, okay, then the question is, what do you do with Atkins? And okay, I'm thinking this through as I'm spouting it. So,
well, at least they could vary looks, at least they could vary the looks. And that's, that makes sense to me. Obviously, you don't want Atkins off the field a lot, but again, Atkins is now a guy that's approaching 30. He had a torn knee ligament a couple of years ago, and he's still a 3-down player, but at some point you got to start limiting these guys' snaps when they're 29, 30 years old instead of 26, 27 years old, and they kind of had a little more gas in the tank to be able to be on the field a bit more. So I get what you're saying there. And there's nothing wrong with showing some diversive looks up front. It's just a matter of them executing that well. And, Sheldon Richardson, that's a big name that they could get on defense. And, the Bengals weren't as strong on defense either last year, whether it was stopping the run or rushing the passer. So, defensive line should help in the form of Billings for sure, and then Richardson. So another one we had from Ryan Jones – I think it was asked to us at least, will Jabrill Peppers be a sleeper pick? Now, I'm sure you absolutely, being an Ohio State guy, Scott, I'm sure you absolutely love Jabrill Peppers. To me, a very interesting player. And if you did not, since you gave it up for Lent, Jabrill Peppers worked out with linebackers and he worked out with defensive backs. Now he's listed as a linebacker, and being as such, he performed very well in the 40-yard dash, the vertical jump, and the broad jump, and all of that. And he ran a 4.46 40, which is obviously fast for a linebacker and still pretty fast for defensive backs. So, might he be a sleeper pick at 9? Whether it's those 2 top wide receivers are off the board, whatever kind of plays out, they're not enamored with Reuben Foster anymore because of what happened at the Combine. Might he be in play at number 9, even if even since they re-signed Drake Kirkpatrick, Adam Jones is still on the roster. They gave extensions to their 2 safeties last year. I don't know. What do you think?
I would seriously hope not. And that's not because of North. But if we were going to go for a defensive back, I would much rather have someone like Jamal Adams from LSU or Malik Hooker from Ohio State. And not just because he's from the Ohio State. But the video I've seen of him, it's interesting if you look at the mock drafts going back to, let's say, Halloween, Advent, Thanksgiving. A lot of people had Peppers in the top 5. Around Christmas, he started dropping out to like top 10 or 15. Yes, up leading up to the combine, you rarely saw him in the top 15 picks. And I think as people have kind of gotten more film of him, they've seen some of the flaws, and some of the things you kind of pick up on real easily are he tends to get burned too easily in coverage for a safety. He tends to be too focused on looking in the backfield, can get out of position in coverage, and he doesn't seem to be an instinctive cover guy, but seems to be more of a run stopper. And so I could see him maybe in like a Sean Williams kind of role that, okay, here's a guy who you're using as a kind of that hybrid, kind of what we had with Taylor Mays. He's a guy you can put in coverage if you absolutely have to, but you're using him more against the run. And I'd be very surprised, since they have the 2 safeties, to see them grab him at number 9, only because he seems to be one-dimensional in his game. Now, he can also do returns. And so then the question is, okay, is a guy who can return the ball really well and a guy who is a kind of a one-dimensional run-stopping defensive back, is that worth a top 10 overall pick? My money would be on no, but I'm obviously not Dick Tobin or Mike Brown or Marvin Lewis. I can't make that decision for him. I'd be surprised, but I can't say I'd be disappointed. I can't say I'd be totally surprised. I don't know. Do you think he'd be there? Do you think I'd be an option?
I think if he, and unfortunately, this is kind of just what it is with him. If he had, he's listed at about 215 pounds. If he had, I think he'd be a better speedy linebacker type of guy, or a guy like how the Rams use Mark Barron, where it's kind of a linebacker safety hybrid. And I think, like you said, the Bengals have tried to do that with Taylor Mays. It never really worked out. But having a guy like a perfect example of this was Troy Polamalu later in his career, where they just said, dude, go and just roam the field. It was almost like just diagnose the play as you see it and fly to the football. And he made a Hall of Fame career out of it. No, I'm not saying Jabrill Peppers is Troy Polamalu by any stretch of the imagination, but he could be, especially because he's viewed as a top 10 pick or so in this year's draft. I just think if teams are looking at him as a defensive back, the Bengals do not need him. They do not need that position, and they do not need it at number 9. Maybe they need it, and if they do something with Adam Jones, maybe things change. There was some talk in our chat room also about USC's Adoree Jackson, a really interesting guy, a track guy, and a very productive guy at USC, but too much of a reach at number 9. Maybe he's there end of the first, top of the second, and that would be interesting. But you almost wish for Peppers, to me, that he was a little bulkier and could really be a true linebacker in terms of NFL prototype. I haven't watched a ton of film on him. You've seen probably more of him than I have, but I do think I see kind of that, not so much a heady playbook type of guy, but a guy that has immense athleticism, and they just kind of said, go do your thing. And some NFL teams may like that. Some NFL teams might not. It just kind of depends. But that's kind of my take on him. Rangy, can do a lot of things, but I don't know if there's a true solid fit for him at this point.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably old enough. I've been following the NFL draft long enough that I think I'm at the point where I'm pretty well convinced. I've been trying to follow, what are look at the guys who are the prospects. What are they good at, bad at? You look at their videos, you look at their scouting reports, you look at how they do the combine, you look at all the stuff, you look at where they get drafted, you look at how they perform. And I think we probably both are at that age where we've seen, several generations of players kind of come and go over the last 10, 20 some years. That to me, the biggest thing that seems to matter is, are the guys good at football stuff on the field? I don't care how fast you are. I don't care how fast you can jump. I don't care if you're, ripped and you take your shirt off. What I care about is, are you instinctive enough that when you're on the field, you seem to know what you're doing, and you just are. And you kind of mentioned Troy Polamalu, that, you just throw him out there and you watch him. You're like, wow, this guy just, he reads the play, he diagnoses, he knows what to do. And that's one of the things I really like about watching someone like Mike Williams is he's not going to be the 4.3 40 guy, but when the ball's thrown anywhere near him, he just does wide receiver stuff at a very high level. And that's something I just don't see with Peppers. He's athletic. He's obviously, a good athlete. But when it comes to some of those defensive back things, especially, the coverage thing, he's just someone that you don't see him and say, yeah, he seems to get, the run support stuff he's good at, and maybe as a nickel linebacker, something. But yeah, I think top 10 would be a bit. But
yeah, and you don't want to use a number 9 overall pick on a niche player in the NFL. You know what I mean? You need, at this point, especially with their losses in free agency, their poor year last year, the Bengals need impact players both at number 9 and at the top of the second round. I think they need immediate impact players to right the ship and really give the fan base a little bit of a hope of, hey, this isn't a team totally in regression now over the past 2 years. Now, I'm not saying Jabrill Peppers can't be that, but I do see what you're saying in the fact that he might be more of a niche guy in the NFL than a guy that is a true 3-down player. But you've seen, like I said, there are guys around the league. Tyrann Mathieu was a guy that's not big for a safety, but has made a ton of plays. The 49ers, when Harbaugh was there, drafted a couple of defensive backs that have been these hybrid corner safety linebackers. And then I said Mark Barron and others with the Rams have been, kind of these guys that have been effective in those roles. But we'll see. One more question, Scott, before we get out of here. We've had a couple of people, including a good friend of the show, Waldo, saying, by the way, what's going to happen to Rex? You had mentioned in an earlier segment that you think he's gone. I think now they'll probably do some things, whether PR moves or whatever, to retain the guys that they want at this point. So I think Rex stays. I just don't know. Like, how are they going to get him on the field? There's Gio's going to get his touches. Jeremy Hill's going to get his touches. That's the one thing I don't know if he actually will stay, because he'll sit there and go, I don't know how much playing time I'm going to get, even though the money might be right.
Yeah, and I think if you're Rex Burkhead, I think I'd be inclined to go, just because, like you said, also there's no offensive line. So if you stay, you've got no one blocking for you, and you're going to be in a 3-headed committee. And I think that's one of the challenges with the Bengals. And I can't say I trust their offensive coordinator enough to figure out how to do that.
That's an understatement.
Just based on last year. And I think that's one of the things you run into is, since you don't have a great running back, you have Jeremy Hill, who, despite all the promise after his rookie year, has been very mediocre. You have Gio, and he could come back and be great, or he could come back and be injured for half, just struggling to get back to 100% and just not do much this year. So, but they're not horrible and they're not great. So it's like, okay, you've got a couple decent guys. You're adding Burkhead in the mix. So you're going to have 3 guys who are all fairly comparable. And at some point you can only have so many decent guys sharing the space. And so if you're Burkhead, do you want to come back for 7-8 touches a game, even if they pay you as much as another team who might say, hey, we'll give you 15-20? Maybe the Vikings, he was Peterson's probably gone teams that just says, hey, we need a clear number 2, or we need a guy who maybe even has a chance to be a number one. Maybe he wants to go somewhere like Dallas where he has a chance to win, be a backup. Maybe he'd go somewhere like the Saints because Ingram's always hurt. Who knows where to go? But I think that you'd almost have to give him more than money. And the Bengals, I can't imagine them paying that much for a running back, and especially since they really didn't use him his first 4 years, that all of a sudden they're going to say, hey, we sat you on the bench for 4 years, but now we really like you.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I like the guy, and the Bengals in the past used their third down backs or their third string backs pretty effectively in the form of Brian Leonard and Dede Dorsey, if you remember that name. I mean, guys were used. Rex really was only used once. Both Gio went down and Hill was banged up at the end of the year. And same thing when he played in the playoffs a couple years. So I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see him stay. It just fills a hole that they don't need in the draft. But if he's just kind of a guy, I don't know. And I'm really curious to see whether he stays with the Bengals or – go ahead.
If they get a trade in place to move on from Hill or something, I don't know who would trade for Hill, but then I could see it happening. Otherwise, I just don't. Because one guy I'm thinking of is someone like Bernard Scott or Kenny Watson. They were guys who were backups, never really got a chance unless everyone and their brother got hurt. Then they would get a decent chance. And I think with Scott, once his rookie year was done or contract, he was basically gone. And I just think they have too many. They are too loyal to the people they have under contract who are the veterans and have more experience. And in that case, that's Hill and Bernard. So unless those guys are moved or something's done, I would be very surprised to see them pay a guy who right now is their number 3.
Yeah, and Bernard's rehab as well on his knee. That's also a factor, I would think. Good. I don't know if you've got anything else on the topic, Scott. Otherwise, I was going to wrap up. Anything else?
As far as footwear related, no, or not on that question.
Okay. Real quick, obviously, I've said this a couple times in the show. If you want to follow us, subscribe to our content, we're on a number of different platforms: iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube. We're on Cincy Jungle. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. The activity tonight, both in fan questions and aside from us liking the fan questions, we love that you guys interact with each other. There are Bengals fans. There was somebody that said, oh, it's 2:30 my time, and is the show starting yet? So there are fans from literally all over the world and all over the place interacting with each other. And even though they haven't met face to face, it's very cool to see them talking in the YouTube chat and everything. So we are live every show. We are live at Cincy Jungle and on our YouTube channel. So check us out.